A little girl lay unconscious in the white snow outside the gates of a cemetery, her small hand clenched tightly around an old military dog tag. When the soldier knelt down to check on her, he froze. The name engraved on the tag belonged to his closest friend, the man he had buried 5 years earlier. In that instant, time seemed to stand still. Michael Harrison never imagined he would encounter Emily Carter, the daughter of his fallen friend here, in the bitter cold of a winter night. A promise he had run from for years was now demanding to be honored. But did he have the strength to save the child from the hell she was being forced to endure? Snow fell thick and heavy that winter night, blanketing the old cemetery on the edge of town in unbroken white. The bitter wind swept through the silent rows of headstones, carrying the sharp, piercing howl of a New England winter. And in the middle of that pitch-black darkness, Michael Harrison knelt in the snow, his body trembling not from the cold, but from what he was holding in his hand. A military dog tag. The metal was icy to the touch. The words etched deep into its surface were still clear despite the passage of time. SGT Daniel Carter. Kia, 2019. Mike closed his eyes, his breath forming a thin cloud in the frigid air. 5 years. It had been 5 years since the day he buried his closest friend in this very place. 5 years since the final promise he had spoken at Daniel's grave. "I'll protect your family, I promise." But now, looking down at the small girl lying motionless in his arms, Mike knew he had broken that promise to the fallen soldier. She was no more than 7 years old, her brown hair matted with snow, her small face pale from the cold. Her thin clothing offered little protection against the merciless winter night. But what stunned Mike the most was the dog tag clenched tightly in her tiny hand. Daniel's dog tag. Emily. Her name surfaced clearly in his memory. Daniel's daughter. The child Daniel had proudly shown him in photos sent back from the battlefield. The child Daniel loved more than his own life, and now she lay here, in the freezing snow, just outside the cemetery where her father rested. Memories surged like a crashing wave. 5 years earlier, Kandahar, Afghanistan, a deafening explosion, a cloud of dust and sand. Mike felt his body thrown backward. His ears rang, the world spinning. As he struggled to get up, a powerful hand grabbed his body armor and dragged him out of harm's way. "Mike, get down!" It was Daniel's voice, always calm in the storm, always the one who stepped forward to shield his brothers in arms. But this time, the price was too high. Mike saw the dark stain spreading across Daniel's shoulder. "Daniel, you're hurt," Mike shouted in panic. "I'm okay, Mike." Daniel managed a faint smile, his voice growing weaker. "I'm just a little tired." They tried. The medics tried. But there are wounds even medicine cannot heal. Before the light faded from Daniel's eyes, he gripped Mike's hand tightly, his voice trembling. "Mike, promise me, live for me, and take care of Emily. She's still so little. Promise me." "I promise, Daniel. I promise." But it was a promise Mike had never kept. Mike opened his eyes, pulled back into the cold reality of the present. For 5 years, he had run from the pain, run from the memories, run from responsibility. He had been afraid to return to Daniel's family, afraid to look into the eyes of a widow and a child who had lost her father. He told himself that his absence would spare them more pain. Now, holding Emily in his arms, Mike realized how wrong he had been. Hey there," he whispered shakily, gently patting her cheek. "Wake up, sweetheart." Emily did not respond. Her breathing was shallow, her lips tinged blue. Panic surged through him. Mike hurriedly took off his jacket and wrapped it around her small body. He scooped her up and ran toward the cemetery gate. The deep snow made every step heavy, but he did not slow down. With trembling hands, he pulled out his phone and dialed emergency services. 911, "What's your emergency?" I need an ambulance right now. There's a little girl, she's freezing, she's unconscious, please, hurry." "What is your location, sir?" "Street Mary's Cemetery, corner of Elm and Oak. Please hurry." 10 minutes later, the wail of an ambulance siren tore through the night. Red and blue lights flashed, reflecting off the white snow like streaks of hope. Paramedics rushed over and gently lifted Emily from Mike's arms. "She's hypothermic. We need to transport her immediately," one of them said quickly, professional concern clear in his voice. They placed Emily on a stretcher, covered her with warm blankets, and attached a heart monitor. Mike climbed into the ambulance, his eyes never leaving her small face. In the flashing interior lights, he saw her more clearly, the hollow cheeks, the dark marks around her wrists, signs of prolonged hardship. Her small hand still clutched Daniel's dog tag, as if it were the only thing she had left of her father. Mike reached out and gently held Emily's cold hand. "Your dad is my hero, sweetheart," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "He saved my life. And now it's my turn to protect you. I promise. This time, I won't break it." The ambulance sped through snow-covered streets, the siren echoing in the cold night. But inside Mike, something was awakening, not pain, not guilt, but resolve. The resolve to keep the promise he had made long ago. The resolve to never let Emily suffer alone again. The resolve to become the man Daniel had believed in. Mass General Hospital welcomed them with harsh white lights and the sharp scent of antiseptic. Emily was rushed into the emergency room. Mike stood outside, watching through the glass as doctors surrounded her, started IVs, and checked her vital signs. "Are you a relative of the child?" a nurse asked, clipboard in hand. Mike hesitated. Who was he? A soldier who had broken a promise, a coward who had run for 5 years. Then he looked at Emily, the fragile child Daniel had entrusted to him. "Yes," Mike said, his voice hoarse. I'm her family." Half an hour later, the doctor stepped out, relief on his face. "She'll be okay. Hypothermia and severe exhaustion, but you found her just in time. A little longer, and the outcome could have been very serious." Mike nodded, unable to speak. Relief washed over him, leaving him trembling. A little longer. If he had arrived later, if he hadn't stopped by the cemetery tonight. "You can go in now." She just woke up. Mike entered the room, his steps heavy as lead. Emily lay in the hospital bed, covered in thick blankets, an IV in her small arm. Her grey-blue eyes, so much like Daniel's, were fixed on the window, where snow continued to fall softly. Hearing his footsteps, Emily turned. Her eyes widened, filled with fear and curiosity. Mike sat down beside the bed, not daring to get too close. How are you feeling?" Emily didn't answer right away. She looked at Mike, then down at her hand, where Daniel's dog tag still rested. "Mister?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Did my daddy send you?" The question struck the deepest part of Mike's heart. Tears poured freely. 5 years of pain, 5 years of guilt, 5 years of running, all shattered in that moment. Mike reached out and gently took Emily's small hand. "Yes, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice trembling. Your daddy sent me, and I will never leave you again. I promise." Emily looked into Mike's eyes, into the eyes of a man carrying a mountain of guilt and determination. And for the first time in a very long while, a small glimmer of light appeared in her gaze. Outside the window, the snow kept falling, but inside the warm hospital room, between a man seeking redemption and a child longing for protection, a new bond was being formed. A promise 5 years in the making had finally begun to be fulfilled. The morning sunlight filtered through the hospital window, but it brought Mike no warmth at all. He had sat beside Emily's bed all night, watching her sleep peacefully beneath the hospital blankets. Each steady breath she took was a reminder that he had arrived in time, but also a haunting question. Why had it taken 5 years? A gentle knock at the door startled him. A middle-aged woman in a white lab coat entered, a thick medical chart tucked under her arm. Her warm brown eyes regarded Mike with concern. "Mr. Harrison, I'm Dr. Helen Martinez, the physician overseeing Emily's case." She took a seat across from him, her tone calm but serious. "We need to talk." Mike nodded, feeling his chest tighten. Dr. Martinez opened the chart. "Emily is suffering from severe malnutrition. Her weight is more than 30% below what's considered normal for her age. We also found multiple old bruises on her arms, back, and legs. This isn't the first time she's been hospitalized," Dr. Martinez continued, turning the pages. "Over the past 5 years, Emily has been brought in 7 times. Most cases involved hypothermia during the winter or extreme exhaustion from lack of nutrition." 7 times, Mike whispered, his voice breaking. "Why didn't anyone do something?" "Doctor," Martinez sighed, regret heavy in her eyes. Each time, her legal guardian, Mr. Brian Carter, had an explanation, and under the law, we can't intervene without clear evidence of abuse. Mike clenched his fists. "I need Brian Carter's address." "Doctor," Martinez hesitated, then wrote it down on a slip of paper. "Mr. Harrison, please be careful. If you truly want to help Emily, do it the right way." Mike took the paper, thanked the doctor, and looked back at Emily one last time before leaving the room. As he stepped out of the hospital, Mike made up his mind to uncover the truth about the 5 years Emily had endured alone, the truth he had not been there to witness. His car rolled through the familiar streets of the town. He stopped in front of a small corner bakery with a sign swaying gently in the wind, Maria's Bakery. Inside, a Hispanic woman in her early 50s was arranging pastries in the display case. She smiled warmly when she saw him. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you? My name is Mike Harrison. I'm trying to learn more about a little girl named Emily Carter. I was told you might know her." The smile slowly faded from Maria's face. She studied him carefully, then sighed. "Emily, that poor child. What are you to her?" "I was her father's friend. My fellow soldier. He passed away 5 years ago." Maria nodded in understanding and gestured toward a small table in the corner. "Sit down. I'll tell you." They sat across from each other, steam rising from freshly poured cups of coffee. Maria looked down at her cup, her voice slow and heavy with sorrow. "Emily started coming here about 4 years ago. At first, she would just stand outside, looking in through the glass. I invited her in, asked if she needed anything. She only whispered, 'Do you have any old bread?'" Maria paused, wiping away tears. Such a little child, not asking for money, only leftovers. I knew something was wrong. I always gave her the freshest bread, but she'd thank me and leave quickly, like she was afraid someone would see her. "Did you ever ask her why?" Mike asked, his throat tightening. "I did, but she only shook her head and said, 'Please don't worry. I'm okay.' But her eyes, Mr. Harrison, those weren't the eyes of a 7-year-old. They were the eyes of someone who had seen far too much." Mike thanked Maria and continued his search. He went to St. Michael's Church, where Pastor David was preparing for the evening service. The elderly pastor, his hair silver white, greeted Mike with gentle eyes. "You've come about, Emily, haven't you?" Pastor David said, as if already knowing. "She comes here every Sunday evening. She sits quietly before the statue of Christ, hands folded in prayer. I once asked her what she prayed for. She said, 'I pray that my daddy is happy in heaven.'" Mike swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "Did she ever tell you about her life?" The pastor shook his head. "No, but I noticed that no matter how cold it was, she was never dressed warmly enough. I gave her a coat, but the next time she came, she wasn't wearing it. When I asked why, she said, 'My uncle needs it more.'" Each story was another piece of a painful puzzle. Mike went to St. Mary's Cemetery, where he met Thomas, the elderly groundskeeper with a full white beard. "You're here about the little girl who sleeps by Daniel Carter's grave, aren't you?" Thomas said before Mike could speak. "I've seen her many nights." She curls up beside the headstone, clutching something in her hands. "I thought about calling the police, but I was afraid she'd be taken somewhere unfamiliar. I was afraid that might be worse." Mike felt his chest tighten painfully. Emily, the daughter of his closest friend, had been seeking safety beside her father's grave, the only place she felt protected. Later, a hospital nurse informed him, "Mr. Harrison, there's an issue. According to policy, Emily must be discharged today, and since Mr. Brian Carter is her legal guardian, we're required to release her into his care." Mike felt his heart stop. "That can't happen. She won't be safe there." The nurse looked at him sympathetically. "I understand, but unless there's a court order or Child Protective Services intervenes." Mike rushed back to Emily's room. She was sitting on the bed while a doctor performed a final check. When she heard she had to go home, her face went pale, her hands gripping the blanket. "Uncle, I don't want to go back," Emily whispered, tears spilling over. Mike knelt beside her and took her hand. "I know, sweetheart, but I promise you I'll find a way. I won't leave you there for long." That afternoon, Mike drove Emily to 247 Maple Street. Shouts echoed from inside the house, slurred with alcohol. The door flew open, revealing a man in his mid-40s with bloodshot eyes and the stench of liquor. "What is it?" Brian Carter snarled, glaring at Mike. "I'm Mike Harrison, Daniel Carter's friend. I'm here to bring Emily home." Brian's eyes lit up, not with relief, but irritation. "Emily? I give her food and a roof over her head that's more than enough. She has to earn money for me." Mike felt his blood boil. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm. "Emily is my friend's daughter. She is not your source of income." Brian scoffed and staggered forward. "Friend of Daniel. Then where the hell have you been for 5 years? Daniel's gone, and Emily is my responsibility." I'm her legal guardian. Responsibility, Mike said, his voice shaking with rage. You call letting her starve, beg for food, and sleep in a cemetery responsibility? Brian narrowed his eyes and stepped closer, his voice threatening. Watch your mouth. If you cause trouble, I'll call the cops and report you as a stranger harassing my family. Behind him, a thin woman appeared, arms crossed, silent. Rebecca, Brian's wife. She avoided Mike's gaze, staring at the floor in shame. Brian looked down at Emily, his face flushed with anger. Why didn't you come home sooner? Who gave you permission to go to the hospital? Emily trembled. I fainted. Someone helped me. Tomorrow you'd better bring in twice as much money as today. You hear me? That was enough. Mike stepped forward, placing himself between Emily and Brian. That's enough. I will not let you hurt her anymore. Brian laughed wildly. And what are you going to do? You have no rights. Emily belongs to me. Mike stared straight into his eyes, his voice cold and steady. I will prove you are unfit to be her guardian, and I will get Emily out of this house. Brian lunged forward, but Mike had already turned and walked down the steps. Before leaving, he glanced up at the second-floor window. Emily stood there, clutching Daniel's dog tag, watching him with desperate eyes. Sitting in his car, Mike's hands trembled as he pulled out his phone. He searched for the number of Sarah Thompson, the social worker Dr. Martinez had recommended. When the call connected, Mike spoke with unwavering resolve. I need help. There's a child who needs to be saved, and I will do whatever it takes to protect her. The Child Protective Services office was housed in an aging building with faded yellow paint. Mike sat across from Sarah Thompson, a 35-year-old woman with neatly tied brown hair and eyes that carried the quiet sadness of someone who had witnessed far too many heartbreaking stories. Mr. Harrison, I understand how you're feeling, Sarah said gently, though her tone lacked optimism. I know about Emily. In fact, we've been monitoring this case for quite some time, but Brian Carter is her legal guardian. Without solid evidence, our hands are tied. Mike leaned forward, his eyes fixed with determination. Then I'll find the evidence. I'll do whatever it takes to protect her. Sarah studied him closely, then sighed. If you truly want to help her, you need to do this the right way. Document everything. Gather statements from anyone who can testify. And most importantly, don't let your emotions drive your actions. Mike nodded, though deep down he knew this would be the hardest battle he had ever faced, not against enemies on a battlefield, but against a system, and against a man hiding behind the shield of the law. 3 days later, Mike rented a small room directly across from 247 Maple Street, the house where Emily lived with her uncle. From the second-floor window, he could observe every movement at Brian's home. He set up a camera, prepared a notebook, and began the relentless task of surveillance. On the first night, Mike witnessed a scene that made him clench his teeth to keep from rushing down to intervene. At exactly 11 p.m., Brian's front door flew open. Emily stepped outside, dressed in thin clothing, an old knitted scarf wrapped around her neck. She paused at the gate, gazing up at the night sky as if searching for something, then walked off into the freezing snow. Mike followed her through binoculars. Emily moved from one street corner to another, stopping in front of closed shops, sitting down on the sidewalk with a small box placed before her. She didn't call out. She didn't beg. She simply sat there silently, her eyes lowered. Occasionally, passers-by dropped a few coins into the box. Emily would gently nod in thanks, never saying a word. Mike photographed every moment, each click of the shutter, a fresh stab of pain. At 2 in the morning, Emily finally returned home. She counted the money in the box, then knocked softly on the door. Brian opened it, snatched the box from her hands, said something Mike couldn't hear, and slammed the door shut. Emily stood outside for several more minutes before she was finally let in. Mike recorded everything: the times, the outside temperature, Emily's condition, Brian's reactions. Every detail mattered. The following nights were no different. Mike didn't sleep, he lived on coffee and vigilance. He documented Brian's behavior, how often he drank, how often he shouted, the way he treated Emily like a tool for making money. Mike also revisited Maria, Pastor David, and Thomas. All of them agreed to testify, signing written statements Mike had prepared. Each signature was a spark of hope, another piece of the truth taking shape. But Brian Carter was no fool. He soon realized someone was watching him. One night, as Mike was taking photos, the yard light suddenly came on. Brian looked straight toward Mike's window and smiled coldly. The next morning, police knocked on Mike's door. 2 officers stood in the hallway, their expressions serious. "Mr. Mike Harrison, we've received a complaint of stalking. Please come with us to the station." Mike didn't resist. He knew he had to cooperate. At the police station, he sat in an interrogation room, harsh white light shining directly into his face. Fortunately, the person who entered was not a stranger. "Mike," a familiar voice said. Officer James Blake, Daniel's old friend, stood in the doorway, concern written across his face. "I heard you were in some trouble." Mike let out a breath of relief. "James, I know how this looks, but I had to do it. Emily is—" "I know, Mike," James interrupted, taking a seat across from him. "I believe you, but we have to follow the law. Brian Carter has legal rights. You can't take matters into your own hands. Let me help you." Just then, the door swung open. Brian walked in with a triumphant grin. "Well, look at this, the war hero turned child stalker," he sneered. "Mr. Harrison, who do you think you are? Superman?" Mike clenched his fists. Every instinct in his body urged him to lunge forward, but he knew he couldn't. One reckless move would destroy everything. He locked eyes with Brian, his voice icy. "I'm not afraid of you, Brian, and sooner or later, the truth will come out." Brian scoffed and turned to leave. "We'll see who wins." When Mike was finally released, night had fallen. He returned to his room and looked out the window, and what he saw sent a chill through him. Emily was curled up in the corner of the second-floor room, dim light casting shadows across her small face. Through his binoculars, Mike spotted a fresh bruise on her cheek. Rebecca stood in the doorway, clutching a handkerchief, as if she wanted to step inside but couldn't bring herself to do it. Then she turned away, leaving Emily alone in the darkness. Mike felt his chest tighten painfully. He wanted to break down the door and pull Emily out of that house immediately, but he knew he couldn't. His phone rang. It was Anna, his younger sister. "Mike, are you okay? I heard you're doing something dangerous." "Anna, I have to," Mike replied wearily. "I can't abandon her." "I understand," Anna said softly, "but you can't save everyone. Don't let the past consume you." "But she's Daniel's daughter," Mike said, his voice breaking. "I promised him." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Anna sighed. "Then save her the right way, Mike. And please keep yourself safe." That night, Mike couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, watching the faint light from Emily's room. She wasn't sleeping either, just sitting there, hugging her knees, staring out the window. Perhaps she was looking toward him too, silently hoping someone would come to save her. Early the next morning, Mike's phone rang. "Sarah Thompson, Mr. Harrison, I've filed an emergency petition requesting an investigation. The preliminary hearing will take place in 3 days. This is our only chance." A flicker of hope sparked inside Mike. "Thank you, Sarah. I'll have everything ready. 3 days. Just 3 more days." Mike looked toward the house at 247 Maple Street, where Emily was struggling to survive one day at a time. He whispered, as if she could hear him. "Hold on, sweetheart. Just 3 more days. I'll get you out of there. I promise." But Mike didn't know that Brian Carter was preparing as well something darker. A plan to keep Emily under his control forever. The silent battle between light and darkness was reaching its peak, and the next 3 days would decide the future of a child. The wall clock struck 3 in the morning, but Rebecca Carter could not fall asleep. She lay on the worn-out bed, staring at the ceiling with reddened eyes. Beside her, Brian's drunken snoring rose and fell in a steady rhythm, but to Rebecca it sounded like a constant reminder of everything she had silently endured. Rebecca slipped out of bed and walked to Emily's room, opening the door as quietly as she could. The small room had no heater, no thick blankets. Emily lay curled up on an old iron bed, clutching her father's dog tag, her lips bluish from the cold. Rebecca felt as though her heart were being squeezed tight. How long had she been here? 5 years. And throughout all that time, she had watched an innocent child slowly wither away, like a flower deprived of water and sunlight. Memories flooded back. When she first met Brian, he had not been like this. He had once been a gentle man with a warm smile. They had met at a small cafe, talking about dreams and the future. Rebecca had thought she had found a home, a place where she belonged. But then Daniel died, and the death of his younger brother changed Brian completely. Jealousy, resentment, and grief transformed him into someone else entirely. Daniel was a hero, respected by everyone, and Brian, just a pale shadow of the brother who was gone. When Emily was placed in their care, Rebecca believed it might help Brian heal. Instead, he saw the child as a burden, and then as a tool. I've become an accomplice to a monster, Rebecca whispered, tears streaming down her face. It could not go on like this any longer. At first light, Rebecca slipped out of the house. She carried with her a small notebook she had hidden for years, the notebook Brian used to record the money Emily earned each day. Every dollar and every coin. Proof of a crime that had gone on for far too long. The Child Protective Services office had just opened when Rebecca walked in. Sarah Thompson was preparing her morning coffee when she noticed the trembling woman standing at the door. "Can I help you?" Sarah asked gently, but cautiously. Rebecca swallowed hard and held out the notebook with shaking hands. "This is the evidence. Brian forces Emily to beg for money and records every dollar. She makes $50 to $100 a day, but she's fed stale bread and sleeps in a freezing room." Sarah took the notebook and flipped through the pages. Each line was clear proof of systematic exploitation. She looked at Rebecca with searching eyes. "Why are you only helping Emily now?" Rebecca sat down, covering her face with both hands as tears slipped through her fingers. "Because I was once an abandoned child myself. I know what that feels like, what it's like to have no one stand up for you. I've been silent for too long. I can't let that child go on like this anymore." Sarah placed a hand on Rebecca's shoulder, her voice warm. "You did the right thing, and we will protect both you and Emily." An hour later, Mike's phone rang. Sarah's voice on the other end was filled with excitement. "Mr. Harrison, we have the evidence. Rebecca Carter came in. She gave me everything we need." Mike felt as if a massive weight had been lifted from his chest. For the first time in weeks, he smiled. "Thank you, Sarah. What's the next step?" "We're filing an emergency petition today. With this evidence, the court will have to intervene." That afternoon, a police car and Sarah's vehicle pulled up in front of 247 Maple Street. Mike followed behind, his heart pounding. Officer Blake stepped out, a document in his hand. Brian opened the door, his face flushed with rage. "What are you doing here again?" "We have a temporary court order," Officer Blake said firmly. "Emily Carter will be placed in protective housing until the formal hearing takes place." "You have no right," Brian shouted, but Officer Blake was already stepping inside. "We do have the right and we're exercising it." Emily was sitting in the corner of the upstairs room when she heard the commotion. When Sarah came up the stairs and extended her hand with a gentle smile, Emily looked at her with wary eyes. "Emily, you're going somewhere safer," Sarah said softly. "A place with warmth and food, and Uncle Mike is waiting for you." At the mention of Mike's name, Emily's eyes lit up. She reached out and took Sarah's hand, walking down the stairs. As she passed Brian, she flinched, but Officer Blake stood firmly between them. Hope Haven, the temporary shelter, was a small, welcoming white house with walls covered in children's drawings. When the car pulled up, Mike was already waiting at the gate. He wore a heavy coat and held a small teddy bear in his hand. Emily stepped out of the car, saw Mike, and all the barriers inside her collapsed. She ran to him and wrapped her arms tightly around him, the first tears she had shed in so long finally spilling free. "Uncle Mike, I was so scared. I thought you had left me." Mike knelt down and held her close, his voice trembling. "I promised your dad. I will never leave you. Never." Inside the shelter, Emily was taken to a small but sunlit room. There was a soft bed with thick blankets, a desk with colored pencils, and a bookshelf filled with fairy tales. That evening, after Emily ate a full, warm meal, Mike sat beside her bed and read her a story. It was about a brave knight who protected a little princess from an evil dragon. "Uncle," Emily asked softly, her voice hesitant, "can you be my dad?" Mike stopped reading and looked into her clear eyes. In them, he saw both hope and the fear of rejection. He placed his hand on her head and gently stroked her soft hair. "If the court agrees, I will take care of you for the rest of my life. I will be the father you deserve." Emily smiled a small, sincere smile, the first she had shown in a very long time. She hugged Mike tightly, then lay down, falling asleep for the first time without clutching her father's dog tag, because now she knew someone was protecting her, right here. Mike sat by the bed until Emily was fast asleep. He looked at her peaceful face, and for the first time in 5 years, the promise he had made to Daniel no longer felt like a burden of guilt, but a reason to go on. Courtroom number 3 at the Suffolk County Courthouse was filled with morning sunlight streaming through the tall windows. Judge Robert Green, 60 years old, with neatly combed silver hair and steely eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses, sat high on the bench. His stern expression revealed no emotion, but those who knew him understood that he was unfailingly fair. On the left side of the courtroom, Sarah Thompson sat beside Mike Harrison, a thick stack of files spread out before them. Mike wore a well-tailored black suit, yet his hands were clenched tightly together, betraying his tension. On the right, Brian Carter sat next to his attorney, Mark Sullivan, a middle-aged man in a polished grey suit, his confident smile carefully calculated. Emily waited outside in the anteroom, seated beside a social worker named Linda. She clutched her father's dog tag tightly, her lips moving softly in silent prayer. The hearing regarding the guardianship of Emily Carter is now in session, Judge Green announced, striking the gavel. His voice echoed through the room. Counsel for the petitioner, you may proceed. Attorney Mark Sullivan stood, a professional smile on his face. Your Honor, my client, Mr. Brian Carter, is the sole legal guardian of Emily Carter. Mr. Mike Harrison has no legal standing whatsoever regarding this child. We contend that this is an unlawful interference in a private family matter. Brian rose from his seat, dabbing his eyes theatrically with a handkerchief. Emily is my only niece. I may be poor, yes, but I love her. These people are trying to take her away from her family, from the only relative she has left. Under the table, Mike clenched his fists, fighting back a surge of anger. Sarah placed a steadying hand on his shoulder, signaling him to remain calm. Judge Green nodded slightly. Counsel for the respondent, please present your evidence. Sarah stood, her voice calm but firm. Your Honor, we have substantial evidence that Emily Carter has been subjected to neglect and abuse over the past 5 years. She opened a medical file. These are records from Massachusetts General Hospital. Emily has been admitted 7 times in 5 years, primarily for malnutrition and hypothermia. Dr. Helen Martinez was called to the stand. She stepped forward, placed her hand on the Bible, and took the oath before addressing the judge. Your Honor, as Emily's attending physician, I can confirm that she suffers from severe malnutrition. Her body weight is more than 30% below the healthy standard for her age. Additionally, there are multiple indicators that she has endured prolonged hardship. Can you be more specific, Doctor? Judge Green asked. There are old bruises, signs of inadequate medical care, and most importantly, psychological indicators consistent with long-term emotional distress. Attorney Sullivan stood abruptly. Your Honor, this does not conclusively prove— Enough, Judge Green interrupted. Continue. At that moment, Rebecca Carter entered the courtroom. She wore a simple grey dress, her hair pulled back, her eyes red and swollen. As she stepped onto the witness stand, the room fell completely silent. You are Brian Carter's wife, correct? Judge Green asked. Yes, Your Honor, Rebecca replied, her voice trembling, but I am here today to tell the truth. Brian shot to his feet, his face flushed with rage. What do you think you're doing? Order! Judge Green struck the gavel sharply. Mr. Carter, sit down immediately. Rebecca took a deep breath and began. Brian forced Emily to beg for money every night. She had to bring in $50 to $100 a day. Brian took every cent. Emily was never allowed to keep anything. On nights she didn't earn enough, he threw her out and made her sleep in the freezing snow. Sarah held up a small notebook. This is the evidence. Brian Carter recorded every dollar Emily earned, like entries in a ledger. Judge Green accepted the notebook and flipped through the pages, his expression growing increasingly severe. Rebecca continued, her voice breaking. I stayed silent for far too long. I was afraid. I was weak. But I cannot allow that child to suffer any longer. I'm sorry, Emily. I'm so sorry. Brian leapt up again, pointing at Rebecca. You're betraying me? You dare? Officer Blake rose from the back row and stepped forward, ready to intervene. Judge Green struck the gavel repeatedly. Mr. Carter, one more outburst, and you will be removed from this courtroom. Next, Mike was called to the stand. He stepped up, placed his hand on the Bible, and spoke clearly. I swear to tell the truth. Mr. Harrison, Judge Green said, please explain your relationship with Emily Carter. Mike drew a deep breath and looked directly at the judge. Daniel Carter was my closest friend. He saved my life while we were serving in Afghanistan. Before he died, he asked me to take care of Emily. I broke that promise for 5 years. 5 years I lived with guilt, too afraid to face the truth. But now I've found her, and I will not break my promise again. His voice trembled but remained steady. Emily deserves to be loved. She deserves a warm home, enough food, and an education. I'm not wealthy, but I can give her those things. And most importantly, I will love her as my own child. At that moment, Sarah stood again, her tone grave. Your Honor, we have one final piece of evidence. She raised a folder. Police investigations have revealed that Brian Carter contacted an individual named Gary Thompson, a known offender with a criminal record for labor trafficking. Mr. Carter intended to sell Emily to this individual to pay off his debts. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Brian stood, his face drained of color. No, that's a misunderstanding. Gary Thompson has been arrested and has confessed, Sarah continued. This is an audio recording of a conversation between Mr. Carter and Thompson. Judge Green listened to the recording, his expression hardening with every passing second. When it ended, he struck the gavel decisively. I have heard enough. He fixed his gaze on Brian. Brian Carter, you are hereby permanently stripped of guardianship over Emily Carter. You will face criminal charges for child exploitation and labor trafficking. Brian screamed, his face twisted with fury. No, that girl belongs to me. Emily Carter does not belong to anyone, Judge Green said sternly. She is a human being who deserves dignity and love. She will be placed under the protection of Child Protective Services. Mr. Mike Harrison is granted the right to file for legal adoption. The gavel fell one final time. Court is adjourned. Mike rushed into the waiting area, his heart pounding. Emily was sitting on a bench and looked up when she heard his footsteps. The moment she saw the smile on his face, she understood. You're free now, sweetheart, Mike said, dropping to his knees and holding her tightly. You're free. Emily wrapped her arms around him, tears of joy and relief streaming down her face. You didn't leave me. You didn't leave me. Never, Mike whispered. Never. On the third night in her new home, Emily woke up screaming her own name. The nightmare had returned vivid and terrifying, as real as life itself. In the dream, Brian stood in her bedroom doorway, pointing at her with a cold smile. You think you can run? You belong to me. Don't take me back. Don't take me back. Emily screamed, her body shaking, her pajamas soaked with sweat. Mike rushed into the room, turned on the light, and dropped to his knees beside the bed. Emily, sweetheart, I'm here. I'm here now. He pulled her tightly into his arms, feeling every tremor in her small body. You're safe. He can't hurt you anymore. Emily clung to Mike, silent tears soaking into his shirt. She didn't speak, she just trembled and held on tighter, as if letting go might make everything disappear. Mike stayed by her bedside all night, softly singing the lullabies his mother used to sing to him when he was a child. Moonlight streamed through the window, casting gentle patterns across the floor, but the darkness was still there, hiding in the corners of Emily's mind. The next morning, Mike took Emily to see Dr. Patricia Moore, a child psychologist with kind eyes and a soothing voice. After an hour alone with Emily, Dr. Moore invited Mike into her office. Emily is dealing with serious psychological after-effects from what she's been through, Dr. Moore said gravely. She's experiencing post-traumatic stress. The nightmares, the fear, the inability to trust anyone. These are all natural responses. Mike lowered his head, his hands clenched. What can I do to help her? Time, patience, and above all, love. Dr. Moore replied with a gentle smile. Emily needs to know she is loved unconditionally. She needs to know that none of this was her fault, and she needs time to heal wounds that can't be seen. But Emily wasn't the only one battling nightmares. Mike was, too. That night, when Emily finally fell asleep, Mike lay down and closed his eyes, only to find himself back in Afghanistan. Daniel lay in his arms, his eyes slowly fading. Take care of Emily. Promise me. Mike jolted awake, sitting upright, his breath ragged. Guilt crashed over him like a tidal wave. If I'd come back sooner, he whispered into the darkness, Emily wouldn't have had to suffer for 5 years. His phone rang. It was Anna, his sister. She knew he was struggling. You can't carry this guilt forever, she said gently. You can't change the past. But you're changing that child's future. That's what matters. Mike nodded in the dark, even though Anna couldn't see him. I wish I could do more. You're doing enough, Anna said softly. Believe that. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Rebecca Carter was packing her belongings in a small rented room. She had received letters from Brian, threats sent from jail. I won't let you get away with this. She knew she had to leave, to disappear and live quietly to stay safe. Before she went, Rebecca asked to see Emily one last time. Mike allowed it, staying close to make sure everything was safe. Rebecca knelt in front of Emily, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she said softly. "I should have protected you sooner. I was weak. I was afraid. But I want you to know your freedom is what I wanted most of all." Emily stood still, looking at Rebecca with conflicted eyes. She wasn't ready to forgive. She couldn't forget. But some small part of her understood that Rebecca had been a victim in her own way. "I hope one day you can forgive me," Rebecca said, then stood up and walked away, knowing she might never see Emily again. As for Brian, he sat alone on a hard bed in a cold jail cell. He realized he had lost everything. No family, no freedom, nothing. For the first time, he felt regret. He wrote a letter to Emily, the words uneven and clumsy. "Emily, I'm sorry. I was wrong." When the letter arrived, Mike kept it. He didn't let Emily read it. She wasn't ready. She might never be. And that was okay. Days passed, and Mike learned how to live with Emily. She was afraid of closed doors, so he kept them slightly open. She was afraid of the dark, so he left a nightlight on all night. She was afraid of shouting, so he always spoke gently, patiently. Some nights, Mike sat in the hallway with his back against the wall, crying quietly from a sense of helplessness. He wanted to erase all of Emily's pain, but he knew healing didn't happen overnight. One evening, Mike sat in the living room holding a photo of Daniel, looking into the face of the friend he had lost. "I'm trying, my friend," he whispered. "I'm doing my best." Soft footsteps approached. Emily had come out of her room and stood in the doorway, looking at him with sad eyes. "Do you miss my dad?" she asked. Mike turned and nodded, tears shimmering. "I do, every day." Emily stepped closer and looked at the photo. "I miss him too, but my memories are blurry." Mike pulled her into his arms. "Your dad was the best man I ever knew, and you're very much like him." Emily was quiet for a moment, then asked softly, "Uncle Mike, can I sleep with you? I'm scared." Mike felt his heart melt. "Of course, sweetheart. I'm here. I'll always be here." They lay together on the couch, Mike holding Emily and softly singing lullabies. And for the first time in many nights, they both slept peacefully. No nightmares, no fear, only the warmth of two people learning, together, how to heal. The call came at 4 in the afternoon. Mike was preparing dinner when his phone rang. Officer Blake's voice on the other end sounded tense. "Mike, I need to let you know, Brian Carter has been released on bail." His attorney challenged the procedure, and the judge granted bail while the appeal is pending. Mike felt the blood drain from his face. "How long until the appeal hearing?" 2 weeks. "Mike, there's a restraining order prohibiting him from approaching Emily, but you need to be careful. He's out." Mike glanced toward the living room, where Emily was sitting on the floor drawing pictures. She had just begun to smile more, to sleep more soundly. And now, the shadow from the past had returned. That evening, Mike checked the locks 3 times, making sure every window was tightly secured. Emily noticed the worry in his eyes. "Uncle Mike, what's wrong?" she asked softly. Mike sat down and took her hand. "Nothing, sweetheart. I just want to make sure you're safe." But later that night, as Mike sat watching the news, he heard a noise outside. He looked through the window, and his heart nearly stopped. A figure stood by the gate under the dim streetlight. Brian Carter. He didn't knock. He didn't shout. He just stood there, silently staring at the house, as if searching for something he had lost. Emily saw him too. She had been coming downstairs to get a glass of water when she glanced out the window. Brian's face emerging from the darkness froze her in place. "He's come for me," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "He's going to take me back." Mike rushed to her, pulling her tightly into his arms and shielding her from the window. "No, I'll protect you, I promise." He led Emily upstairs and told her to stay in her room with the door locked. Then Mike stepped outside, each step heavy but resolute. Brian was still there, his hair disheveled, his clothes wrinkled. When he saw Mike, he didn't move forward or back. He stood motionless, like a statue carved from sorrow. "What are you doing here?" Mike asked coldly. Brian swallowed, avoiding Mike's gaze. "I just wanted to see her. From a distance. I know I was wrong, but Emily is my only family, the last blood relative of Daniel." "You had your chance," Mike said firmly. "You had 5 years to love her, and you chose another path. You destroyed everything." Brian's hands trembled as he raised them, as if trying to explain. "I wasn't always like this. When Daniel died, I lost my way. I was jealous of him. Everyone respected him, admired him. And me? I was just a shadow. So you took it out on an innocent child." Mike stepped closer, his voice controlled but filled with restrained fury. "You claim you had rights as her uncle, but rights belong to those who deserve them. And you? You were nothing but someone who ruined her life." Brian collapsed to his knees, tears pouring down uncontrollably. I'm sorry, Daniel. I betrayed you. You were a hero, and I'm a failure." For the first time, Mike saw Brian not as a monster, but as a broken man, someone who had let grief and jealousy turn him into one. But that truth did not erase what Brian had done to Emily. "I can't forgive you," Mike said, his voice softer but unwavering. "And neither can Emily. Leave, and never come back." Brian staggered to his feet, turned, and disappeared into the darkness. Mike stood there until his silhouette vanished completely. When Mike went back inside, he saw Emily standing at the second-floor window, looking down. She had seen everything. Her face was filled with tangled emotions, fear, resentment, and something that resembled guilt. Mike went upstairs and sat beside her. "Do you want to say anything to him?" Emily shook her head, clutching her father's dog tag tightly. "I just want him to disappear and never come back. I don't hate him, but I can't forgive him. Not now, maybe not ever." Mike pulled her into his arms. "That's okay, sweetheart. You don't have to forgive. You just need to keep living and keep healing." 2 days later, Brian was arrested for violating the restraining order. The appeal hearing moved quickly. With new evidence of Brian's violation of the court order, the judge sentenced him to 8 years in prison. This time, there was no bail, no second chance. When Mike received the news, he felt as though a massive weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He called Sarah Thompson. "I want to formally file for Emily's adoption." Sarah smiled on the other end of the line. "I already have the paperwork ready, Mr. Harrison." A week later, in a notary's office, Mike signed the most important documents of his life. Emily stood beside him, looking up at him with eyes full of trust. "From now on, you are officially my daughter," Mike said, his voice thick with emotion. "Emily Harrison." Emily smiled a radiant smile, brighter than any she had ever shown before. "Emily Harrison. I like that name, Dad." For the first time, she called Mike Dad, and for the first time in 5 years, Mike felt that the promise he had made to Daniel had truly been fulfilled. The darkness of the past was still there, but now the light had begun to shine through, and with each passing day, that light would only grow brighter. 6 months passed like a gentle dream. Spring arrived, carrying the scent of blossoms and the sound of birdsong. The small house Mike and Emily shared was no longer quiet. It was filled with laughter and light. On the first Monday morning of September, Emily stood at the gate of her elementary school, wearing a brand new uniform and a pink backpack. Mike held her hand, feeling the slight tremble in her small fingers. "Dad, I'm scared," Emily whispered, looking at the noisy crowd of students laughing and playing. Mike knelt down and met her eyes with a warm smile. "I know you're scared, but I'll be right here waiting for you. When school lets out, you'll see me standing at this gate, I promise." Emily nodded, took a deep breath, and walked through the school gate. Each step was a small victory, another step farther away from the shadows of her past. Inside the classroom, Miss Lucy, Emily's former teacher, was waiting. When she saw Emily walk in, her eyes filled with tears. She hurried over, knelt down, and gently hugged her. "Welcome back, Emily," Miss Lucy said, her voice trembling. "I thought about you every single day, and now you're here. You've come back." Emily smiled, shy but sincere. "I missed you too, Miss Lucy." The first days were difficult. Emily was still hesitant, unsure about sitting in class or playing with other children. But little by little, she began to change. She learned to raise her hand to speak. She learned to laugh when classmates told jokes. She learned how to be a child. A month later, Emily was invited to the birthday party of a classmate named Sophie. Mike drove her there and brought along a small gift, a beautifully illustrated picture book. Emily walked into a house filled with balloons and laughter, attending her first real birthday party. When Mike came to pick her up, Emily ran out with a radiant smile, her cheeks flushed. "Dad, I played games, ate cake, and Sophie said I'm her best friend." Mike hugged her, his heart overflowing. This was everything he had hoped for, a child finally allowed to live like a child. That evening, while Mike was washing dishes, Emily walked up behind him and wrapped her arms around his legs. "Daddy Mike, I love you." Mike froze, tears spilling freely. He turned around, knelt down, and held her close. "I love you too, Emily. I love you so much." Over those 6 months, Mike had changed as well. From a lonely soldier living in the shadow of the past, he had become a devoted father. He learned how to braid Emily's hair every morning, awkwardly at first, making her giggle. He learned how to cook heart-shaped pancakes for weekend breakfasts. He attended parent-teacher meetings, listening as Miss Lucy spoke about Emily's progress. "Emily is a remarkable child," Miss Lucy said at one meeting. "She's been through so much, but now she's blooming. And that's largely because of you, Mr. Harrison." Mike shook his head. "Not because of me. It's because of Emily herself. She's stronger than either of us realizes." The surrounding community embraced the new family with warmth. Maria from the bakery started a baking class for Emily every Saturday. Emily learned how to knead dough and shape cookies, and each success brought a brighter smile to her face. Pastor David held a Thanksgiving service at the church and invited Mike and Emily to attend. "We gather today to give thanks for a miracle," he said to the congregation. "A miracle of love, forgiveness, and new beginnings." Neighbors brought gifts, new clothes, school supplies, fresh bouquets to celebrate the new family. Mike and Emily's small house became a place filled with kindness and hope. One weekend afternoon, while Mike was fixing a window, Emily called out, "Dad, come look at my drawing." Mike stepped into the living room and saw Emily holding up a piece of paper, smiling proudly. On it was a picture of a tall man holding a small girl, with a bright sun behind them, its golden rays shining. "Is this you and me?" Mike asked, his voice catching. Emily nodded eagerly. "Yes, Dad. I remember the first time I woke up in the hospital. I asked if you were sent by my dad, Daniel, and you said yes." She pointed to the sun in the drawing. "Dad Daniel talked to me in a dream. He said he would send an angel to protect me, and Daddy Mike is my angel." Mike couldn't hold back his tears. He pulled Emily into his arms, feeling her small heart beating against his chest. "I'm not an angel, sweetheart," he said softly. "I'm just a man trying his very best." "But to me, you are," Emily replied earnestly. "You saved me. You gave me a home. You taught me how to love." It was a moment of peace, no nightmares, no fear, only the warmth of love and a family that had finally found each other. And in both their hearts, they knew this was only the beginning. There were many days ahead to build memories, to heal, to love. Winter had passed, spring had come, and now, together, they were stepping into the summer of a new life. The story you have just followed is a work of fiction, but it is inspired by real events that have occurred in everyday life. The names of characters, locations, and certain details have been changed to protect the privacy and safety of those involved. However, the emotions, pain, and journey of healing that Mike and Emily experience genuinely reflect what thousands of families face every single day. From this story, we can draw several profound lessons about life. First, never remain silent in the face of injustice. If you or someone you know is enduring a difficult situation, speak up. There are always people willing to help, from social workers and law enforcement officers to kind neighbors like Maria, Pastor David, or Thomas. Second, love and patience possess extraordinary healing power. Mike proved that a determined father, even one who arrives late, can still completely change a child's life. Third, promises carry immense value. It took Mike 5 years to fulfill his promise to Daniel, but when he finally did, he gave it everything he had. Fourth, community has tremendous strength. No one can save the world alone, but when many people stand together, from Rebecca, Sarah, and Officer Blake to doctors and teachers, miracles can happen. Finally, hope never truly fades. Though Emily once slept in the freezing snow and endured 5 years of hardship, she ultimately found the light. And that proves that no matter how dark the night may be, there is always a dawn at the end of the road. If this story touched your heart, please click like to support the channel. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss other meaningful stories about compassion, redemption, and love. Every subscription helps us continue sharing inspiring stories that spread kindness and hope to more people. Please consider sharing this video with friends and family, because who knows, the story of Mike and Emily might reach and change the life of someone who is desperately in need of a glimmer of hope. Leave a comment to share your thoughts about this story. What do you think about Mike's journey? About Emily's courage? About Rebecca's decision? We truly look forward to reading your reflections. Thank you for taking the time to listen to Mike and Emily's story. Remember, you are never alone. If you or someone you know needs help, do not hesitate to reach out to child protection organizations, support hotlines, or local authorities. Every child deserves to be loved, protected, and safe. Let us create change together. A promise kept can change an entire life. A small act you take today may become the light for someone lost in the darkness. Wishing you and your family peace, happiness, and a life filled with love. We look forward to seeing you again in future stories.